Hello and welcome back to In Good Spirits, the podcast where we talk all about the wonderful world of whiskey, from investment casks to bottles. I'm your host, Thomas Ballantyne, whiskey taster, investor and general whiskey enthusiast. Today I'm joined by my wonderful fiancée, Wenqing, who knows absolutely nothing about whiskey, but would like to know more.
Hello everyone, I'm Wenqing and you can call me Bella, and I'm his better half. As Thomas mentioned, I know very little about whiskey, but it is becoming a bigger and bigger drink of choice in China instead of the Chinese alcohol, baijiu. And with it recently being an interest of my dad's, I want to buy him a couple of bottles, but I have no idea where to start.
Well, lucky for you, I'm here to help. And I'm sure many of my listeners would have very similar questions to yourself. But before we zoom into your questions, let's give a quick overview of spirits in China. And for those of you who are trying to understand the pronunciation, imagine it as saying baijiu. Baijiu. That's a quick win for everybody. But baijiu is the biggest selling spirit in China, making up about 96% of total spirits consumption. Whiskey occupies only about 1% of the market, with imported spirits overall forming a very small slice of that overall pie. According to industry forecasts, China's whiskey sales are expected to almost double from £920 million in 2023 to £1.8 billion by the end of 2025, so we'll have to look at those figures. Growth projections suggest whiskey, including Scotch, so you could have whiskey from bourbon from the Americas or whiskey coming from Japan, could increase by about 88% between 2023 and by the end of 2026, significantly faster than global average growth. Baijiu continues to dwarf other spirits in sheer volume. In 2022, China produced about approximately 6 billion litres of baijiu, which, is just insane to think about if you try and equate that to the number of people in the world. Estimated revenues place baijiu at about £81 billion in 2024, and that's accounting for around 70% of China's total alcohol market value. So it truly is the biggest player in the market. So there's some overall just market-leading headlines, but baijiu isn't just China's national spirit. It's one of the most consumed spirits on the planet, and its history stretches back centuries and thousands of years and is woven into Chinese culture around politics, business, family gatherings and celebrations. Whiskey in China, however, is relatively new compared to baijiu. It's only been there since the 20th century, and so it doesn't have this deep underlying cultural meaning behind it. And so whiskey has to kind of find its own place in China, which is interesting as Wenqing mentioned that her dad's getting into whiskey or is starting to discover what whiskey is.
And it's not just my parents' generation. The real group of whiskey consumption in China that I have experienced is actually my generation. I have a lot of friends prefer drinking whiskey instead of baijiu. To me, it feels like a lifestyle shift from generation to generation.
Okay, that's quite interesting. And what do you mean by lifestyle shift?
Well, what I have seen is baijiu as a traditional Chinese spirit represents more than just alcohol itself. It's tied to social obligations and banquets. You drink it more likely with friends, families, colleagues, your boss, or even your business partners. A lot of business deals actually are done on what I would call drinking tables. What I have seen is baijiu as a traditional Chinese spirit represents more than just alcohol itself. It's tied to social obligations and banquets. You drink it more likely with friends, families, colleagues, your boss, or even your business partners. A lot of business deals are actually done on what I would call drinking tables.
Oh, drinking tables, you say? Well, that sounds like a table that would get you in good spirits, should I say.
I hope nobody laughs at this silly joke, please. He says this all the time. Well, the reason why I want to use a drinking table is I want to distinguish it from dining table where you mainly use it to enjoy food. A drinking table represents more than just food. It's art of guanxi, which is about relationship and network building in China. In the old days, a lot of businessmen and women feel obligated to drink, and they often have to get drunk on the drinking table to get the deals done. This is to show that they are being their true selves when they are drunk, and hence to enhance the guanxi with their business partners.
Ooh, that sounds fun. Well, I guess next time I go to the pub, I'm just going to say, babe, I'm late tonight. I'm enhancing my guanxi.
Understand my point about drinking baijiu. Sometimes people drink it because they have to, not because they want to. Baijiu itself has a social character in it. However, in my generation, a lot of us are not following those old rules of doing business. And this is where whiskey is playing its part in our lives. And I think we prioritize more of our personal space and personal relationships over business relationships.
Well, I think that is truly exciting for the whiskey world and for whiskey lovers everywhere. And perhaps in a show in the near future, we can do a comparison taste testing of baijiu versus whiskey. Now, as you mentioned, my future and father-in-law is looking to buy a couple of bottles of whiskey, and you want to get him a couple of bottles. So how can I help in this endeavour?
Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm here today. And also, my dad wants to buy a couple of bottles for his friends. However, he's asking me questions in the logic of baijiu. I don't really know how to help him in that way. I think we need to back to the basics of how to ask the right questions before you buy anything. So can you tell me, what should be the first question when buying a bottle?
Well, firstly, the very easiest way is to ask your dad or anyone that you know, what whiskey have they ever had before? This could be a Johnnie Walker Blue, it could be a Johnnie Walker Black, it could be a Macallan 10, or it could literally be nothing at all. And if it's nothing at all, don't worry, I can walk you through what to get for them. Now, before we kind of move on any further, what I would like to go over is how you can value a whiskey and how you can assess whether it is a good or a bad one. Not to say that any time you walk into a whiskey shop, the salesman is there to fleece you for anything, but this is just to equip you with the basics so they actually know that you have the knowledge to challenge them, but also you feel comfortable in what you're talking about with the salesperson, so you know you're getting something of value, good quality, and something maybe a bit different that they've never tried before. So to break it down, there's 3 areas: age, distillery, and volume. Age, it's very simple. 3 years and above. The older it goes, the more expensive is the general theme, and also the general quality of the whiskey. Now, I would never say at X age means it's a great whiskey, because whiskey is great at all ages. But for simplicity, let's just say higher the age, the better quality of the whiskey, and you'll see that in the prices. Second, the distillery, the reputation. The easiest one is Macallan. Macallan is known as the James Bond, the Rolex, the Rolls Royce of whiskey. Everyone's heard of them. They are the most expensive. So to give you a comparison, a Macallan 12-year-old is just as expensive as a Glenfiddich 18. Is it better? Is it worse? Who knows? That's all your own personal preference. But you can see that just by the distillery name, there's a huge change in price. So look up kind of the top 5 brands and whiskies, or you can listen to one of my earlier shows where I talk about the top 10 distillery names out there at the moment. And then finally, it's always about the volume. How much was made that year? How much is made in that batch? So if you want something unique, I would point everybody to go for a single cask whiskey. What does that mean? Basically means the whiskey has only been aged in one barrel its whole life, and then it's all bottled. So depending on the size of the barrel, you'll get anywhere between 200 to 400 bottles of whiskey. So if you want something unique, have a look at those. They can be more expensive, but you are paying for that exclusivity. So 3 things: age, distillery, and volume. So now you get a sense of those trade-offs, right, of how to value a whiskey. You're looking at those 3 criteria. So whatever your budget, have a look at those ranges and think about what you want more to kind of give to someone. Will they care about a higher age? Because a lot of whiskies have non-age statements. Will they care about having something a bit more unique that they know only 200 people will ever have and will ever be made of that particular style? Or do they care, having a Rolex of whiskey and they want to show that off a little bit? We all like to show off a little bit sometimes, so I can understand that. And the second question you should ask yourself is, if they've never tried a whiskey or you're not aware of any whiskey they've had before, is what kind of food and what's their flavour vibe? Do they like smoky? Do they like sherry? Do they like, strong flavours in their food? Or do they like something more softer and sweeter? Whiskey has such complexity in its style and such variety of flavours out there that it can accommodate to every single palate. So after these two questions of knowing if they've had anything before and what kind of food they enjoy, you can start narrowing down the choices of whiskies out there. For example, if you know he hates kind of thick, leather, smoky kinds of food, which are definitely like Marmite, by the way, you should probably rule out all the Islay stuff. If they don't like any of the sweet stuff, get rid of the Speyside. And with your budget range, using those 3 markers of age, distillery and volume, you can start narrowing down what kind of bottle you want to get them, and hopefully get it down to a top 5. And that's what I always tell people, is you should narrow it down to a top 5 before going for a purchase. Don't ever take the first one that a salesman would give you, and then don't try to buy these things immediately on the day unless you are pressured and you need to get it done. But take the time to consider all these other factors because whiskey is so personal. And then the third part is, go to a whiskey shop and see if they have these bottles open to try. Believe it or not, loads of whiskey stores have loads of bottles open you can try. Now, they're not going to give you a full shot of these things, but they'll give you a good enough sample so you can at least get a sense and a flavour of what that whiskey is about, and then compare it to the other ones. And that way, it's a lot more of a personal choice that you've given. And I think people will appreciate that you've gone to that extra length to know what kind of whiskey you're getting for them. But then also, simply put, if you know their flavour profile, you can taste it for them and then know what they're going to have it. And it's always nice to know what you're buying for someone if they don't want to share it with you anyway. That's always a bit of a good win-win at the end. So I know whiskey's a bit of a personal thing. Not everybody always shares it. That is myself included. So Bella, those are the 3 things I would go through if I was going to, go buy whiskey for your dad, or what you should go through if you were going to buy whiskey for your dad, is find out if they've had anything before, understand what kind of food or just flavour profiles they like, and then do your research to narrow it down to the 3 to 5 bottles that you think they'll enjoy, and go try it in the stores if you can. That way you can almost guarantee that they'll enjoy that whiskey because you have understood what they've liked, you know what flavour they go for, you know all the differences between the quality of the age and the value of the distillery names and the rareness of the whiskey that you're buying. And at the end of the day, if it's still wrong, at least you know you like the whiskey, even if they don't. So maybe they'll share it with you even more, and you've got yourself a winner there to enjoy a lot more. Or a Christmas present that comes round back to you sooner rather than later.
That is very useful. Thank you very much, Tom. So what are you going to get for my dad and his friend?
Well, he's certainly not getting a Macallan 50-year-old, but using my 3 steps, I'm sure I'll find him a great bottle he'll enjoy and share. Or at least I know I will enjoy when I come over. Now, moving on from all the fun bottles of buying and Guanxi and Baijiu and all the fun characteristics around that, let's talk a little bit about politics and investment of whiskey casks, because I'm sure that's what everybody has come to listen to. So, as some of you might be aware of, the UK Prime Minister has recently gone on a trade mission to China to speak all things about visas and business relations, and whiskey was at the heart of one of those trade talks, with the headline figure of whiskey tariffs being dropped from 10% down to 5%. Now, I'm all for tariffs being reduced and how that will boost the whiskey world. But as I spoke about in the opening kind of paragraph, if we can remember that far back, the whiskey market in China isn't as large as you might think. And whilst China is a large market for whiskey and is a rapidly growing market, Baijiu is still the biggest spirit consumed out there. So it's got a lot of work to do to play a big game. And so is this 5% really going to help whiskey penetrate the Baijiu market and to start taking over that 70% that it dominates? I don't think so. Or at least it's not going to happen overnight. And so it's similar to what we had with the India tariffs. I mean, India's trade went from 150% tariffs down to 75% tariffs. And if you want to know more specifically about that, again, please listen to one of my earlier shows when I talk about the India trade deal. So this trade deal is not even half that. It's nowhere near the same amount, and it's not near the same volumes. So it's not like it's going to be a game changer for the whiskey world. I don't think it's going to suddenly boost the demand for whiskey around the world to ultra high levels. And so with these reduced in tariffs, yes, you get better margins. Yes, there's more confidence for importers. Yes, it's easier market access. But I don't think it's going to have the necessary impact that people will think in terms of investing in casks. Now, do I think you can still make money out of whiskey? Absolutely. Do I think then I should put all of my money in right now because China's got a 5% tariff reduction? I think that's a very binary way of looking at it and the incorrect way of looking at it. Do I think whiskey is a great investment vehicle? Yes, for many reasons, and you can listen to my show and earlier episodes how I talk through that. But given that this market is big but not, the biggest for whiskey at the moment, it's not really going to have that much of an impact, I think, overall, particularly on the prices anyway. So I think whilst it's good for trade relations and good for the whiskey in general, and hopefully tariffs will be zero across all nations eventually, it's not going to be this silver bullet that's going to, double in price for whiskey and we're going to see something crazy happen in the whiskey world. And a good example of this is actually Diageo. So for those of you who don't know, Diageo is the biggest business for whiskey. They own about 100 whiskey distilleries in Scotland. And, these guys make the Johnny Walkers. They have huge powers over the single malt market because of the amount of distilleries they own, and the amount of blends that they sell is phenomenal around the world, and they are, the biggest player in it. But Diageo is actually pulling back from China, and that's, counterintuitive to what this tariff might be doing. And are they suddenly going to reinvest in their China strategy? I don't think so. And, this is not to say that Diageo are never going to sell in China, but they're just reassessing what their strategy is in China. Luxury spending in China has become a bit more cautious. Gifting culture, which whiskey is softenly tagged to, has, gotten weaker. And younger drinkers are drinking less in general around the world. That's just not a China thing. That's a whole global thing. And so legacy and prestige no longer guarantees that you're relevant. And there's no guarantee that you're, a big brand that happens to go in that you're going to sell your whiskey. So, companies like Diageo are kind of assessing what is the strategy to go in to tackle a big market like this. Can you just walk in and flex with your big name like they've kind of done? Or do they actually fundamentally need to reassess what they need to, sell to that audience and sell to that market? It's a really crude example, but if you look at like a McDonald's or a KFC, I'm sure many of you have seen this when you go around the world. What they sell in a KFC or a McDonald's in America is what they sell different in Europe is what's different in Asia. Yes, fundamentally the business is the same, right? It's got the same look and feel, but actually what's on the menu is slightly different. So I think this is where Diageo are just having a reassessment and pulling back a little bit on China is to say, well, we can't just go in and just say we've got these brands, go buy them. They have to think about what is it used for. And the kind of the example when we were talking through with Bella earlier about, the customary drinking about China and how that can play a big role. Do people see that as a thing going forward and can it break into that market? Or is it always going to have its own bit on the side instead of it being one that you have with drinks and you have a particular business relationship with, that you have a much more of a, personal relationship with, and everybody has these, things to kind of celebrate with one or two members of the family for, very special occasions. Things like this is what Diageo really got to assess in that market. So I think fundamentally, China's whiskey market won't mirror Scotland, Japan, or the US. It will just have to develop into its own thing and evolve into its own market in itself. And I think that's the same for the India market as well. It's great that the tariffs are going down, but let's fundamentally reassess how we get into that market and what the market strategy is for people enjoying whiskey in those regions. It's obviously a very different climate and a very different attitude to drinking whiskey. So that is it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening if you've made it this far and you haven't fallen asleep. And thank you so much to my wonderful fiance for jumping on and talking about Baijiu and China and Guanxi. It was really interesting to find out, the evolving relationship that China's having with the whiskey world. But whiskey doesn't need to replace Baijiu to succeed. Baijiu will always dominate China's spirits landscape, I think, and its roots are too deep. Its rituals are too embedded in its culture and in its way of working. But what whiskey can do is offer something different. That reflection instead of ritual, that story instead of status, that meaning instead of scale. And I think that's the angle that whiskey should play in those markets. For investors, collectors, producers, the future of whiskey in China belongs to those playing the long game. So, as I've always said, if you want to make a 20-year-old, you're going to have to wait 20 years. You can't turn on the tap and make 20-year-old whiskey in a day. And, if you have this kind of long vision and long view of whiskey, China is going to be a very fun place to be and a very interesting market. If anyone is passing through China, please could you have a look for a Bruichladdich finished in a China wine cask finish from the Grace Vineyard. It looks delightful to drink, but unfortunately it's limited to the Chinese market. So if there's ever a reason to visit China and buy a whiskey from there, there's these exclusive whiskey barrels that have been aged in ex-Chinese wine casks, and they look fantastic. So if anybody's out there, please bring me back a bottle. If not, I'm going to have to fly out myself and try one. And once I do, I'll do a taste test for everybody on the show to kind of give you a good idea as to what that whiskey is like. Because I think it's certainly an interesting style, not one I've seen before. Thank you all for listening to In Good Spirits. Until next time.